Henry Knox Appleton was born November 8, 1839, in Boston, Massachusetts. He died on April 24, 1890, from typhoid fever in Allston, Massachusetts. He mustered in the Navy on May 1, 1864, and was assigned to the USS Alabama. Entered out on April 30, 1865. He served as a surgeon steward. That duty involved, not only being present in the hospital but also assisting surgeons, on the march, in the camp, on the battlefield, or on board naval ships. There are several other stewards noted in this program. As the pharmacists of that era, those men were in great demand in the military and civilian life. After the war, he attended the Massachusetts College of Pharmacy. At the time of his death, he was the treasurer of the college. He was a member of the Masonic Bethesda Lodge, Brighton, Massachusetts. Credit, biographical sketch of Gideon F. Barstow, M.D., by Samuel Hutchins, M.D., and other sources. Gideon Forrester Barstow, the son of the Honorable Gideon Barstow, was born in Salem, Massachusetts, on December 23, 1815. He died June 5, 1864, aged 48 years, 5 months and 12 days. He entered the sophomore class at Harvard College at the early age of 14 years and went through the regular course of study. Soon after graduating, he commenced the study of medicine with Dr. Pearson, of Salem, Massachusetts, and subsequently, for the purpose more especially of attending surgery, with Dr. Walker of Charlestown, Massachusetts. At a later period, he attended the medical school at Philadelphia, and afterward at the University at Cambridge, where he received his diploma in the year 1837. He commenced practice in the city of New York, in company with Dr. Mead. But after some 7 or 8 years, his health failing him, hoping by change of climate to restore it, he moved to his native town of Salem, where he succeeded his father, who had for many years practiced there. His labors there, however, proved too much for him, and after a long and severe illness, yielded to the advice of his friends, and gave up the medical profession for a time, engaging meanwhile in civil engineering, hoping that constant exercise in the open air and relief from the heavy responsibilities necessarily attendant upon the physician's life, might restore his health. After a few years, he found himself quite well wrong. He returned to his early profession, recommencing practice in August 1859, at Putnam, Connecticut. It was said that he possessed a great fondness for his profession, for which he was eminently fitted, but his temperament was too highly sensitive and nervous to permit him to enjoy it without injury to his health. Though as successful as could be expected in so limited a field, it was soon evident that his health was again failing. He suffered exceedingly at times from neuralgia and rheumatism, which he supposed he inherited from his father. On the occasion of a visit to his mother in Boston, in May 1864, suffering from neuralgia and general debility, many of his friends, and among them Governor Andrew of Massachusetts, endeavored to persuade him to leave Connecticut, where his health was becoming so evidently broken. Very soon after his return to Putnam, he was summoned to Boston to receive his appointment as a surgeon in the United States Army, to be stationed at Fort Warren, in Boston Harbor. He proceeded at once to that place for the purpose of accepting the appointment and making such arrangements as should be necessary, intending after a short time to return to Putnam and close up his business there, preparatory to entering upon his new duties. Finding it necessary, however, to assume them immediately, the former surgeon in charge had left at once. He delayed for a few days his return to Putnam until he should have taken the business well into his own hands. He left his mother's house in Boston for Fort Warren, on June 2, feeling quite well and in fine spirits, hoping and expecting that he should receive great benefit to his health from the sea air, light duties, and congenial surroundings. On the following day, he received intelligence of the sudden death of his youngest brother, at New Bern, North Carolina, which agitated him exceedingly. His brother, 23 years younger than Gideon, was Lieutenant Nathaniel Saltonstall Barstow, was briefly stationed at Fort Warren in late 1861 guarding prisoners. He soon was deployed to the south. On the next day, Saturday, he wrote a short note to his mother upon this affliction, closing it thus: "We must try to be comforted by the thought that our brother died nobly in a good cause, remembering that death always comes in the right time." He retired to rest that night, so far as is known, as well as usual, but alone, in the silent hours of the night, his spirit passed into eternity. Of the purity of his motives and the kindness and gentleness of his heart, of his high attainments as a scholar, of his fidelity and forgetfulness of self in his devotion to the sick committed to his care, of his zeal and earnestness in the cause of the Union and the right, and of his character as a gentleman and Christian, all who knew him can bear full testimony. Credit. American Medical Biographies, 1920. Bell, Luther Vos by George Alder Bloomer. Luther Vos Bell was born in 1806, in Francistown, New Hampshire. He died on February 11, 1862, at Budd's Ferry, Maryland. He attended Phillips Academy in Andover, Massachusetts, for a year, then entered Bowdoin College at age 12, and graduated in 1823. He moved to New York to study medicine and later received a medical degree from Dartmouth College in 1826. Because of his youth, he was in New York in business until 1831, when he returned to Derry, New Hampshire, to establish his medical practice. In 1836, he was appointed to the McLean Asylum. It was the first mental hospital in Massachusetts and was established in 1818 as an affiliate of the Massachusetts General Hospital under Dr. Rufus Wyman. Wyman established a treatment program known as moral treatment, which had been instituted by the Quakers in England. Bell continued this treatment method. Dr. Bell wrote to Dorothea Dix, "Each year has served to diminish my confidence in an active medical treatment of almost every form of disease of the mind and to increase my reliance on moral means." The establishment of the Worcester Asylum, under state auspices, in 1833 diverted indigent patients from McLean, which allowed the staff there to treat more affluent patients and to provide patients with comforts including occupation and recreation. In 1844, Dr. Bell was granted leave by the Board of Trustees of the McLean Asylum and toured England and France. Upon his return, Bell was offered the superintendent's position at Butler Asylum, in Rhode Island, but declined, and remained at McLean. As the superintendent at McLean, Dr. Bell was interested in hospital ventilation, and in 1848, presented the annual address to the Massachusetts Medical Society on this subject. In 1850, he became a member of the executive committee to advise the governor in cases of application for the pardon of criminals under sentence. He served as a forensic examiner for the Massachusetts courts. While acting in this capacity, he passed upon the famous case of Professor Webster of Harvard University, who was executed for the murder of Dr. George Parkman. During his tenure at McLean, 3 of Bell's 7 children died and his wife died in childbirth. He suffered bouts of pneumonia and ptosis. In 1856, he retired from McLean and built a home in Charlestown, Massachusetts, in Monument Square, the site of the Bunker Hill Monument. With the advent of the U.S. Civil War, Dr. Bell applied for a commission as a surgeon in the U.S. Army, and was assigned to the 11th Regiment Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry. He took part in the Battle of Bull Run in Virginia. Bell treated many wounded soldiers in a church near the battlefield, including one John P. Meade, who subsequently succumbed to his wounds. Dr. Bell later wrote Meade's wife a moving letter now in the National Archives. He advanced to the post of division surgeon in the 11th Regiment under General Joseph Hooker. Partial credit. Obstetrical Society of Boston. Historical sketch of its members in the War of the Rebellion. By George H. Lyman M.D., 1887. George Holmes Bixby was born in Suriname, Dutch Guiana, in 1837, where his father was the United States Consul. He died from paralysis caused by lead poisoning in Boston, on February 20, 1901. During the war, various sources of lead could be found on ships. He received his education at Francistown, New Hampshire Academy, Williams College, the Vermont Medical College at Woodstock, Harvard Medical School, and Dartmouth College, where he received his medical degree in 1858. He immediately visited Europe for a postgraduate course and was in Vienna at the commencement of the rebellion. He returned after the Battle of Bull Run, to offer his services to the government, and arriving on January 1862, he applied at once for service. After the Battle of Shiloh, which took place on April 6 and 7, an urgent appeal for surgeons was received from the President of the Weston Sanitary Commission. Dr. Bixby immediately responded to the call. He reported to the Empress. A large steamer, which the commission was fitting out with surgeons, nurses, and sanitary supplies for the seat of war. He continued this volunteer service for 6 weeks, assisting in the transportation of all the sick and wounded from the Battle of Shiloh to St. Louis. Desiring a more permanent place, at the recommendation of the President of the Commission, he obtained a position in the gunboat service, receiving his commission as acting assistant surgeon in the United States Navy on June 1, 1862. The large steamer, the Red Rover, had recently been captured. He was ordered to take charge of it and fit it out as a floating hospital. On June 6 he reported to Commodore Charles Davis at Memphis, and immediately received the sick and wounded from the different engagements in that area. The ship went to Vicksburg, during the summer of 1862, which is one of the most sickly seasons ever experienced on the river. The rate of mortality in both the Navy and Army was unparalleled, taxing the medical service to its utmost capacity. In December 1862 the ship went to St. Louis for overhauling. In February 1863, the ship returned to the squadron under the command of Admiral Porter. Dr. Bixby remained there until the end of the war, and disposing of the sick and wounded from a fleet of 80 vessels. Dr. Bixby left the service on November 25, 1865, after 3.5 years of continuous active service. He spent the year 1867, completing his gynecological studies in Paris and Vienna. At a time when his professional prospects were the brightest, his health became impaired, and he was obliged to give up his practice. William Lycurgus Bond died December 28, 1886, in Boston at age 58. He was born February 2, 1828, in Nashua, New Hampshire. He graduated from Harvard Medical School in 1862. During the war, he served as an assistant surgeon of 53rd Regiment, Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry. After a forced march, the regiment was stationed in New York. On January 17, 1863, the regiment embarked for New Orleans. They arrived on January 29 and were briefly stationed at Camp Carrollton. They were sent to Baton Rouge on March 6 to prepare for operations against Port Hudson. Shortly thereafter they cooperated with Admiral Farragut in his attempt to pass the batteries with his fleet. Returning to Baton Rouge on March 20, on April 1 they were sent to Algiers, opposite New Orleans, to assemble with other units for the expedition. On April 9 they engaged in combat at Fort Bisland. 3 of the men were killed. On May 5 they started for Alexandria on the Red River. It was a 4-day forced march that covered 100 miles. During that time, they were in several engagements. On July 12 they arrived back at Baton Rouge where they remained until August 2. Their 9-month obligation, having been completed, they returned to Fitchburg, Massachusetts on August 24. Of the 950 officers and men, who set out with the regiment, 33 had been killed having been mortally wounded and 133 died from disease. That was 18% of the regiment. It was the largest number of lives lost by any 9-month Massachusetts regiment. He mustered on December 1, 1862, and mustered out on June 20, 1865. After the war, he was a druggist and physician. William Cleveland Brigham was born September 2, 1840, in Boston. He died December 4, 1895, at Chelsea, Massachusetts. Please note these 2 terms. Stewards were pharmacists. An inmate was a physically ill person, being treated out of their residence. From the Boston Globe, December 4, 1895, page 4. Lost several fortunes. William C. Brigham, an inmate at the Chelsea Soldiers' Home, committed suicide this morning. Lacking any other information, the following must suffice as his biography. William C. Brigham, an inmate of the Chelsea Soldiers' Home, shot himself this forenoon at 10:30. The weapon used was a .32 caliber revolver. The act was premeditated, as Brigham went to his room, fastened the door, and putting the revolver to his head, pulled the trigger. He instantly. Mr. Brigham had been an inmate of the home for about 6 months and was a resident of Medford, where he lived with his 3 unmarried daughters. He was a member of Post 66 of Medford and was well known in the business circles, both in Medford and in this city. He enlisted in the 44th Regiment, Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry on August 29, 1862, as a hospital steward, and was discharged in June 1863. He is said to have possessed several small fortunes during his life but lost them all. His son, a young man of 24, committed suicide a year ago last summer. All these things are thought to have preyed upon the father's mind and finally drove him to take his life this morning. Much of the following was taken from the Boston Children's Hospital Archives program. Francis Henry Brown was born in Boston on August 8, 1835. He died on May 13, 1917, after being fatally struck by a streetcar at age 82. The brown lot does not have a mark. The blue star marks the lot. He attended Boston Public Latin School and graduated from Harvard College in 1857. He went on to receive his medical degree from Harvard in 1861. It seems an idea of building a new hospital had been brewing in Brown's mind for many years. His thesis for the Harvard Medical Faculty had been on the construction of European hospitals, particularly the importance of ventilation for patient health. After the war and the death of his first wife, he traveled across Europe for the majority of 1867, to study this subject more closely and practically. It was on this trip, after visiting children's hospitals in London, that he realized the need for such an institution in Boston. Upon his return, Dr. Brown brought together other physicians to discuss the possibilities and championed the idea of a Boston Children's Hospital, for both the medical community and the public until it became reality. He would faithfully serve as secretary on the board of managers as well as a consulting surgeon of Boston Children's Hospital until his death. Dr. Brown was the author of the 1866 Roll of Students of Harvard University who served in the Army or Navy of the United States during the War of Rebellion. The book enumerates class year, rank, names, unit and period of service. In 1886, he also authored a record of services rendered in the Army and Navy of the United States by the graduates and students of Harvard College and the professional schools. Each graduate's is detailed by unit and dates period of service. The is Dr. Brown's entry. Francis Henry Brown, M.D. Acting Assistant Surgeon USA September, 1861 to 25, January, 1864. At Camp Cameron, Cambridge, Massachusetts. Next, Judiciary Square Hospital, Washington, D.C. and at Headquarters Army of the Potomac, near Antietam, Maryland. Private, 12th Unattended Company, Massachusetts Voluntary Infantry, May 16, 1864. Before leaving camp at Reedville, Massachusetts, he was detailed as assistant surgeon in charge of the post. July 1, the camp was changed from a state military rendezvous to a United States General Hospital. Retained as an acting assistant surgeon, and was occupied in organizing the establishment for 1,000 beds, and care of patients. Out, August, 1864. The following is all the information that I could locate about Dr. Brown. William Andrews Brown was born in Boston, Massachusetts on July 22, 1840. He died March 28, 1897, in Newton, Massachusetts. His estate left $7,000 to the Newton Cottage Hospital. In 1864, he left Harvard at the end of his freshman year. He mustered in the United States Navy in 1861, as a surgeon, and mustered out in 1864. June 28, 1866. After the war, he is noted as a member of the 2nd of Light Artillery, Boston. In 1872, he was practicing medicine at K.K. General Hospital, Vienna. That information was located in Harvard's second report of the class of 1862. The 1880 census notes that he and his wife were living at Coldwell, New York. He was interested in astronomy. The April 24, 1883, Boston Transcript contained an advertisement. Opium and morphine habit. A limited number of patients taken in a private home. For full particulars, address of William Andrews Brown, M.D., Newton, Massachusetts. Dr. Algernon Sidney Coolidge was born in Boston on August 21, 1830, the son of Joseph Coolidge and Eleanor Randolph Coolidge. His mother was the granddaughter of Thomas Jefferson. He died on January 4, 1912, at Boston. Dr. Coolidge was educated abroad, and returning as a young man he entered Harvard Medical School, from which he graduated in 1853. Later he took an active part in the Civil War, first in the Sanitary Commission, then as a Union Army medical officer. The Sanitary Commission was a civilian organization authorized by the United States government to provide medical sanitary assistance to the Union volunteer forces during the Civil War. His service was as acting assistant surgeon in the United States Army, Chesapeake Hospital, in Maryland, Portsmouth Grove Hospital in Rhode Island, and Armory Square Hospital, in Washington, D.C. He went to the front as a surgeon. While in the performance of his duty, he became impaired through septic poisoning from an accidental contact with a wounded soldier who he was attending. He never fully recovered from the effects of the blood poisoning, although it did not prevent him from continuing his profession. During his service, he was an eyewitness to the famous conflict between the Monitor and the Mara, and vividly recalled that stirring event of the war. From 1868 to 1873, he was a surgeon and laryngologist at Mass General Hospital. Dr. Coolidge's brother Sidney also served in the Civil War and was killed in the Battle of Chickamauga. His body was never recovered. Samuel Franklin Cowes was born in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, on September 17, 1825. At the time of his death, on May 1, 1916, at Cambridge, Dr. Cowes was the second oldest living graduate of Harvard College. He died at his home at 10 Mason Street, Cambridge, in his 9th year. He was the son of the late Samuel E. Cowes, a merchant in Portsmouth, and Clara Pierce, daughter of William Pierce of Gloucester. He graduated from Harvard College in the class of 1845. He received his M.D. in 1849 from Jefferson Medical College, in Philadelphia. He entered the United States Navy as an assistant surgeon in 1851. He was made medical director in August of 1876 with the rank of Rear Admiral. He retired in 1885. He made a 3-year cruise around the Cape of Horn on board the sloop Portsmouth, at that time the finest in her class both in sailing qualities and armament. He served throughout the Civil War either on board ships or in charge of naval hospitals. Several examples are: in 1861, the U.S. sloop Housatonic, of the West and Gulf Squad. 1862, the Southantic, of the blockading squad. 1863, the U.S. sloop Saranac, of the Pacific Squad. 1864 to 1865, the Naval Hospital in Chelsea, Massachusetts. In his retirement, he lived in Cambridge, Massachusetts. The majority of this text was written, in 1891, by William B. Stevens, History of Stoneham, Massachusetts, pages 217 to 220. Arthur Harris Cowdery, M.D., was born in Acton, Massachusetts on January 17, 1836. He died at Stoneham, Massachusetts on November 4, 1907. His father was a physician and practiced for 50 years in Acton. Due to poor health, he did not take a collegiate course but studied medicine with his father. He attended 1 course at the Berkshire Medical School, in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, and 3 courses at Harvard Medical School, from which he graduated in 1857. He then practiced medicine with his father in Acton for 6 months and spent the next winter in Philadelphia, attending the Jefferson Medical School and University. In the spring of 1858, he went to Stowe, Massachusetts, where he practiced his profession until August 1862, when he entered the Army. He was appointed, by Governor Andrew, as an assistant surgeon, in the 7th Regiment, Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry. He was in the Second Battle of Bull Run, Antietam, and Fredericksburg, all under the command of Generals Burnside and Hooker. At the Battle of Gettysburg, he served under General Meade, who commanded the famous 6th Corps. In October 1863, he was appointed a surgeon by President Lincoln in the 37th Regiment, United States Colored Troops. His unit went first to Newbern, North Carolina, where he stayed a short time, and then went to Norfolk, Virginia, where his regiment joined the army of General James Butler. In the spring of 1864, the 37th Regiment landed at Powhatan, remained there a while, and was then located at Wilson's Landing until General Grant came from Cold Harbor across the river. The 37th Regiment, then of General Wild's brigade, joined General Grant's forces and went to the front of Petersburg, being there during a portion of the summer and at the camp near Dutch Gap during the battle. Dr. Cowdery was on detached service through the fall at the hospital near Point of Rocks, on the Appomattox River. Later his unit engaged in the skirmish at Raleigh, North Carolina. When the war ended, the unit went back to Wilmington. He resigned his commission on June 22, 1865, and he was mustered out. He came to Stoneham where he practiced surgery and medicine. Being a skillful surgeon and a physician with knowledge and good judgment, he acquired the confidence of the people and had an extensive practice. He was involved in many civic, fraternal, and medical affairs. Charles Frederick Crehore was born in Newton Lower Falls, Massachusetts, on June 18, 1828. He died there, on November 8, 1893. He received his preparatory education at Milton Academy, Milton, Massachusetts, and at W. H. Brooks's private school, Boston, and another private school. He entered the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, Troy, New York, in 1847. He left there in 1849 and joined a party of engineers in Rutland, Vermont. He was at home from 1851 to 1852, then Europe, from 1850 to 53, Minnesota, from 1854 to 57, where he was having charge of the Big Sioux and Mankato Military Road. That road was overseen by Captain James Simpson, United States Topographical Engineers. He studied medicine and graduated from Harvard Medical School, class of 1859. He practiced medicine in Boston until May 1861, when he enlisted in the Union Army. He served as surgeon on the armed steamer, Cambridge. In 1861, he was an assistant surgeon in the 20th Regiment, Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry, and then the 37th Regiment, Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry, from 1862 to 1864. His regiment was in the Peninsular Campaign in Virginia, as well as the 1862 battles, at Fredericksburg and Cedar Creek. In 1863, he was at Gettysburg. In February 1864, he was in the Shenandoah Campaign. During the final year, he was the medical inspector of the 6th Army Corps. Much of the following came from the American Medical Biographies, 1920. By Harry Friedewald. Ezra Dyer was born in Boston, on October 17, 1836, and graduated at Harvard in 1857. He died on February 5, 1887, at off New York. He entered the Harvard Medical School and graduated in 1859. He then studied in Dublin, Bonn, and Vienna, where his interest in ophthalmic surgery was awakened, and he determined to devote himself to this specialty. He went to Berlin in the fall of 1860. Dyer went to London and spent several months at the Moorfields Hospital. He next went to Paris. He returned to Philadelphia in the winter of 1861. During the Civil War, he was given charge of all eye and ear cases in the Philadelphia Army hospitals. In 1864, he was one of the founders of the American Ophthalmological Society, and later was appointed surgeon at Wills Eye Hospital, holding the position as long as he remained in the city. In 1865, he read before the American Ophthalmological Society a paper entitled Asthenopia Not Connected to Hypermetropia, in which he proposed, for of asthenopia, not depending on any error of refraction or muscular insufficiency, a system of ocular gymnastics. This excellent means of treatment has ever since been known as diarizing. In 1884 he invented an ingenious and beautiful perimeter. Perimetry is the systematic measurement of visual field function, the total area where objects can be seen in the peripheral vision while the eye is focused on a central point. In 1873, he left Philadelphia on account of the health of a member of his family, gave up a large practice, and took up his abode in Pittsburgh, where he soon acquired an enviable reputation. In 1879 and again in 1880 he fell and suffered serious fractures from which he never wholly recovered. In 1883 he relocated to Newport, Rhode Island. He was a man of unswerving integrity, unselfish and enduring loyalty, and a childlike faith in those he loved, the characteristics of Ezra Dyer. From the American Encyclopedia and Dictionary of Ophthalmology, page 4098. One day in the autumn of 1879, leaping suddenly to the slippery deck of a ferry, just on the point of departing from the dock he fell and ruptured the ligament of his left knee. At accident, he was always lame and now and again the knee would give way under him. In the spring of 1880, while stepping from a horse car, the injured knee gave way and he fell, breaking his right thigh and dislocating his right hip. After remaining in bed for 6 months, he was once more able to go about but never again recuperated. 2 years later he had a spinal injury. He then sought a milder climate at Newport, Rhode Island. After another decline, he was taken by his family to Florida. He failed to receive the expected benefits. On February 5, 1887 he was taken on ship bound for New York. 4 days later, while still on board, he died. Certain items were found in the semi-centennial anniversary volume of the American Neurological Association 1875–1824. Robert Thaxter Eads was an American physician, neurologist, and professor of clinical medicine at Harvard. He was born on September 23, 1838 at Eastport, Maine. He died on January 12, 1923, in Springfield, Massachusetts, in his 85th year, after a long period of semi-invalidism. He graduated from Harvard College in 1858 and from the Harvard Medical School in 1861. After a period of hospital service, on September 30, 1861, he was appointed an acting assistant in the United States Navy. He resigned on May 31, 1865, after serving as a medical officer on a mortar flotilla on the Mississippi River, below New Orleans, and in Pensacola Bay. That was in addition to doing duty in various hospital posts. Twice promoted, Eads finally attained the rank of assistant surgeon at the age of 27. Returning to Boston, he began to practice medicine and to teach at the Harvard Medical School and the Boston City Hospital. His first publication was a prize essay, A Part Taken by Nature and Time in the Cure of Disease, 1868. He wrote many other scholarly books and papers. In 1871, he was appointed as an assistant professor, and in 1875, as professor, of Materia Medica, which is a branch of medical science that deals with the sources, nature, properties, and preparation of drugs. In 1884, he was named the Jackson Professor of Clinical Medicine, in the Harvard Medical School. He is said to have been a scholarly and erudite instructor, his differential diagnoses being models of accuracy and thoroughness. In 1886, he resigned from Harvard Medical School because of illness in his family. He went to Washington, District of Columbia, where he remained for 5 years, in addition to lecturing at Columbian and Georgetown universities. He then became superintendent of the Adams Nervine Asylum in Boston, upon which he held for 6 years. During that time, he wrote The Story of Rodman Heath, or Mugwumps by One of Them, 1894, an anonymous novel. Based partly on his Civil War experiences, mugwump is an anglicized version of a word used by Massachusetts Indians to mean war leader. The word was sometimes jestingly applied in early America to someone who was the head guy. The first political mugwumps were Republicans in the presidential race of 1884 who chose to support Democratic candidate Grover Cleveland rather than their own party's nominee. Their independence prompted one 1930s humorist to define a mugwump as a bird who sits with its mug on one side of the fence and its wump on the other. The next year he delivered the Shattuck Lecture before the Massachusetts Medical Society on The New England Invalid, a lecture that reviewed his experiences at the Adams Nervine Asylum, foreshadowed with extraordinary perspicacity the trend in the treatment of the psychoneuroses. After an unsuccessful attempt to establish a small private sanatorium for patients with nervous diseases, he retired from practice. The death of his son at the age of 32, in 1901, a young man of exceptional promise in medicine, was a blow from which he never recovered. He continued to write, however, for the daily papers of Springfield, Massachusetts. Dr. Daniel W. Edgerly was born in Alton, New Hampshire in 1837. He died, on September 19, 1890, at Cambridge. In 1860 entered the service for 1 year and a half as the hospital steward and assistant surgeon. He served in Company A, of the 2nd Infantry. In late June 1862, during the Battle of Chickahominy, he and 2 other officers were captured. One was Lieutenant Colonel Varney. He mustered out of the army on November 2, 1862, he either escaped or was part of an exchange for Confederate soldiers. He arrived back in mid-November 1862. In 1863 he began to practice dentistry in Farmington, New Hampshire. For 19 years, he held the position of president of the New Hampshire Dental Association. He had been in poor health since 1882 and was compelled to give up his practice of dentistry. Then appointed as a special United States pension examiner. He held that position with distinction until his death. He was prominent in the Masons, Odd Fellows, and Knights Templars. Theodore Willis Fisher was born May 29, 1837, in Westborough, Massachusetts. He died on October 10, 1914, in Belmont, Massachusetts. He was a resident physician at Deer Island for a year after graduation from Harvard Medical School, class of 1861. He was appointed a surgeon in the 44th Regiment, Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry, for 9 months. August 29, 1862 to June 18, 1863. He was a resident physician at Deer Island for a year after graduation from medical school, then surgeon of the 40th Regiment, Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry, for 9 months. August 29, 1862 to June 18, 1863. During his service, he was involved with the Tarboro, North Carolina expedition, the battles of Rawls Mills, Kingston, and Whitehall, and then assigned to the Foster Hospital in Newbern, North Carolina. In 1863 he was appointed assistant physician to the Boston Lunatic Hospital, resigning in 1869. In 1867 he spent 5 months abroad visiting nearly all the hospitals for the insane in Great Britain and many on the continent, including the Skeel Mental Health Hospital, in Belgium. It had opened 700 years ago. His studies for hospital construction were embodied in the plan for a new insane hospital for Boston which was built at Danvers in 1869 to 1871. From 1871 to 1881, he was an examination to the Board of Directors of Public Institutions in Boston. He also practiced as an insanity expert. He was frequently called to court. He was a witness for the defense of the celebrated Guteo case. He was appointed superintendent of the Boston Insane Hospital in 1891, resigning in 1895 to practice his specialty in the Back Bay section of Boston. He again visited Europe in 1891 and attended the International Medical Conference in Berlin. For 17 years he lectured medical students at Harvard on insanity. Remembering Norton Folsom, M.D., a Civil War veteran, compassionate clinician and early Mass General leader. By Andrew Glyman. Posted on the Massachusetts General Hospital Research blog, September 18, 2023. Norton Folsom, M.D., was a Civil War veteran, mental health specialist, and leader of Massachusetts General Hospital from 1872 to 1877. He is remembered as a man of good temper and invariable kindness. Among his notable achievements, Folsom advanced the science of smell and taste, raised awareness of the health risks of scurvy among Union troops, provided compassionate care for patients with mental illness, and supported the growth of the Mass General Training School for Nurses. Early years and Civil War service. Folsom was born in Boston on April 15, 1842. His early years were spent in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where he attended high school. In 1859, Folsom began his studies at Harvard Medical School. His education was interrupted in 1861, by the outbreak of the Civil War. However, in September of that year, he enlisted in the Union Army. From September 24, 1860 to September 25, 1862, he served as a medical cadet and assistant surgeon, participating in the Battle of Cross Keys, Virginia. From November 24, 1862, to November 4, 1865, he served as a surgeon in the 45th United States Colored Troops. He was at the Battle of New Market Heights. After his service, he returned to Harvard Medical School to complete his medical education. After graduating from Harvard Medical School, in 1864, Folsom served as a house pupil at Mass General before rejoining the Union Army. During his second in the Army, Folsom was a surgeon for the 45th U.S. Colored Troops of the 25th Army Corps. In this role, he raised awareness about the severe disease outbreaks in the camps he was inspecting, particularly scurvy, and linked many of the health problems back to poor food and a lack of fresh vegetables. Advancing the science of and taste. In 1863, Folsom was selected by the Boylston Medical Society as the winner of the Society's annual prize for Best Medical Dissertation for an undergraduate. Folsom was recognized for his essay in the Boston Medical and Surgical Journal on the senses of smell and taste. In addition to a detailed anatomy of the nose and mouth, Folsom's essay describes two types of impressions made by articles of food. One of the savors, of which salt affords an example, the other of flavors, as that of vanilla. Most substances have both properties, thus, a strawberry has an acid and sweet taste, besides its own delicious flavor. Folsom says that all flavors are perceived by the sense of smell only. If the nasal passages are blocked, then the tongue can only sense four different tastes: sweet, sour, salt, and bitter. According to Folsom, this can be demonstrated by having someone hold their nose shut while drinking water with a vanilla extract. Without the sense of smell, the taste is indistinguishable from plain water. Medical leadership after the war. After the Civil War ended in 1865, Folsom took a job as an assistant physician at the Taunton Lunatic Hospital. He was well liked while there, described by the trustees as a man of good temper and invariable kindness. In 1867, when the superintendent of the asylum took a leave of absence to tour Europe, Folsom was named acting superintendent and earned additional praise from the trustees for his conduct in that role. It seems that the Taunton facility was ahead of its time when it came for caring and treatment of patients with mental health disorders. As Folsom reported, so far as bodily condition is concerned, this is a remarkably healthy place. Among over 400 patients and employees, there is but one case of acute disease, and tomorrow there may be none. Folsom returned to Mass General in 1869 as a resident physician and served as superintendent, a role equivalent to hospital president, from 1872 to 1877. As superintendent, Folsom played a key role in helping the hospital's new training school for nurses get up and running. In a history of the nursing school published in 1920, Linda Richards, the first trained nurse in the United States and an early leader of the school, said that if not for the patience and kindness displayed by Folsom during those early years, I doubt if the growth of the school would have been so rapid. In 1875, Folsom was one of people chosen as experts to give advice to the Board of Trustees who would later build Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore. His plans earned high praise from the members of the Massachusetts Medical Society, who described them as clearly defined, detailed, sensible recommendations. It does not detract from the value of his suggestion that many of them are simply modifications of plans and methods already in successful operation under his own supervision at the Massachusetts General Hospital, the Society wrote. Indeed, that fact rather adds to their value, in that they have been tried and have not been found wanting. Later years. Folsom down from his position at Mass General in 1877, due to declining health. Upon his retirement, the Boston Medical Surgical Journal noted, "The 4 years that Dr. Folsom has held this position have been unusually important ones in the history of the hospital." In his later years of private practice in Cambridge, Massachusetts, he was recognized as an expert on mental disease. Folsom died at home in September of 1903. An obituary in the Cambridge Chronicle describes him as someone with a genial temper who enjoyed participating in local dramatic productions and spending time with his many friends, including old Army associates. He was a companionable man, reserved socially, but with his intimates, jocose and amiable. John Lawrence Fox was born on January 8, 1811, in Salem, Massachusetts. He died in Roxbury, Massachusetts on December 17, 1864. A surgeon of the United States Navy, he graduated from Amherst College in 1831. He received his M.D. at Harvard in 1835. In 1837, he was appointed Assistant Surgeon of the United States Navy. In 1847, he was promoted to surgeon. From 1838 to 1842, he served on the ships, the Porpoise and the Vincennes as part of the United States expedition. From 1843 to 1845, the USS Cumberland during its voyage to the Mediterranean. From 1847 to 1850, USS Yorktown, part of the African Squadron deployed to Western Africa to curtail the slave trade. From 1857 to 1850, USS Mississippi, the flagship of Matthew C. Perry's voyage to the Far East. From 1843 to 1864, he worked at Chelsea Marine Hospital when not at sea. That is where he spent the first 2 years of the Civil War. In September 1863, he was assigned to SS Niagara and remained there until his appointment to the post of Fleet Surgeon with the North Atlantic Blockade Squadron. He died in Roxbury, Massachusetts in December 1864. The Boston Evening Transcript December 20, 1864, noted that he had only reached home a fortnight ago. He was in great prostration, caused by heart disease, and failed gradually. Dr. Jesse Frank Frisbie was born July 12, 1838, in Rochester, New Hampshire. He died December 17, 1913, at Newton, Massachusetts. His father, Jesse Frisbie, was lost at sea in August 1839. He obtained his education at Wolfboro Academy and Exeter Academy, both located in New Hampshire, and the Harvard Medical School, class of 1861. He began his practice of medicine at Framingham Center. On November 28, 1862, he was appointed an acting assistant surgeon in the United States Navy. During the Civil War, his service record notes his sea duty in the Atlantic Ocean, after which he was sent north on sick leave. On December 28, 1863, he was discharged on account of disability. He returned to active duty on September 29, 1864. He then at Carver General Hospital, and the Wisewell Barracks Hospital at Washington, D.C. His final discharge was on October 3, 1865. After the war, became a resident of Newton, Massachusetts. He was president of the Boston Gynecological Society. He was on the medical staff, and D. of the Newton Cottage Hospital. The biographical history of Massachusetts stated that he did not shape his professional life. It was determined by his mother and an uncle who was a medical man. A member of the Boston Natural History Society, he wrote pamphlets on geology and astronomy. His will established a hospital in his native city, Rochester, New Hampshire. George Fuller Gill, son of Charles and Deborah Belcher Gill, was born in Farmington, Maine in February 1843. His father was a sea captain and merchant. He fitted at Phillips Exeter Academy, entered college in the fall of 1859, and continued through the course. He intended to become a lawyer. After graduation, he at once entered the military service as a hospital steward in a regiment of the Rhode Island Cavalry. He then attended Harvard Medical School in 1862–63, was appointed as a United States medical cadet in March 1863. He went to Louis, where he pursued his medical studies at the Medical College of the University of St. Louis, graduating with a medical degree in March 1864. He was then made acting assistant surgeon of the Army at Madison General Hospital in Indiana. He continued there until the close of the war in July 1865, left the service and settled into the practice of medicine at St. Louis, where he resided until his death. He was in the frontier service in the Winter Indian Campaign, 1869–1870, as surgeon to the 5th and 10th Regiments of the United States Cavalry. He was abroad in 1873–74 and 1882, studying at the principal hospitals of Europe. He then held the professorship of diseases of children at the St. Louis Medical College. It was characteristic of him that during the outbreak of cholera, he remained constantly at work. He died in 1892, at Magnolia, Massachusetts. Taken away in the prime of life, he had accomplished a full life's work and left the memory of a noble nature and skillful physician. Credit to Harvard Memorial Biographies. Author, Thomas Wentworth Higginson, 1866. Samuel Foster Haven was born in Dedham, Massachusetts, on May 20, 1831. His father was S. F. Haven, Esquire. He died on December 13, 1862, at the Battle of Fredericksburg, Spotsylvania County, Virginia. Samuel Haven was educated at Harvard College, Cambridge, Massachusetts, where he graduated in 1852. He then went on to Boston Medical College, where he received his degree as a doctor in medicine in 1855. He studied for 2 years in Europe where he specialized in diseases of the eye. He practiced for a short time in Boston in 1858, at Worcester. He showed marked ability as an author. When he entered the army, he left an important body of work nearly ready for us. On August 5, 1861, Samuel mustered into service with the 15th Regiment, Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry as an assistant surgeon. His enlistment was credited to Worcester's quota. He was 30 years, 2 months and 16 days old. On July 21, 1862, he was promoted to surgeon. His superior officer, Surgeon Sherman, wrote of his conduct at Fredericksburg. Witnessing his self-exposure at the Battle of Antietam, I had, as medical director of the 2nd Division, detailed your son, in a written order, in the event of battle, to repair to the division hospital and give his services there instead of the field with his regiment. When I communicated this order to him, he felt disappointed. He expressed a strong choice to go wherever his regiment went, and when the column to which the 15th Massachusetts was attached was about to pass over the bridge in front of Fredericksburg, he was expostulated with, and rid of the previous order. But he asked as a special favor to be allowed to go with his regiment and said that as soon as the fight was done, he would return to the hospital and remain there. He was wounded in the leg by a shell on the 13th. His leg was amputated, but he never recovered from the shock. He was 31 years, months, and 23 days old. At the age of 17, he entered Harvard College and graduated in the class of 1852, the last of 4 successive generations of his name and family in the catalogue of the alumni of that university. Soon after graduation, he entered his medical studies as the Dr. Henry Sargent of Worcester, and subsequently became a member of the Tremont Street medical class in Boston. During the last year of his pupillage he held the position of house physician in the Massachusetts General Hospital. In the autumn of 1855, having earned his degree of doctor in medicine, he visited Europe and spent 2 years in ophthalmology in London, Paris, Vienna, and Berlin. He remained in Europe until he entered the army. Dr. Haven was essentially a student all his life. His mental organization and moral qualities admirably fitted him for scientific research. He was endowed with a subtlety of divination, a love for, and facility in, minute observation, a power of handling details, an honesty of purpose, and a rare industry, fidelity, and perseverance, that could not fail of success in that department. He seemed unable to slight anything. All his works were finished with the elaborate nicety of touch painting. But his conscientiousness was, perhaps, the most striking of his moral characteristics. With him, the appreciation of a duty ensured its performance, no matter what the cost or self-sacrifice involved. Though to a man thus constituted a military life could present but few attractions, Dr. Haven did not hesitate when the appeal came for troops. Duty seemed to call him, and that was enough. Appointed assistant surgeon of the 15th Massachusetts Regiment. He cheerfully departed for the seat of war in August 1861, never again to return to the city of his residence, until, nearly 8 months afterward, to his lowly resting place. Though in the service about a year and a half, he never asked for a leave of absence to revisit his home, nor, it is believed, was he ever absent from his post for a single day, except on imperative business. Much of the time while assistant surgeon, owing to the illness, or absence of superior medical officer, he had the sole charge of the sick and wounded of his regiment. He early arrived at the conviction, eventually fatal to himself, that it was the duty of a surgeon to follow his regiment into actual battle so that he might be near at hand to succor the wounded. At Ball's Bluff, indeed, he was not with his regiment in the conflict itself, but, in his station on Harrison's Island in the middle of the Potomac, he was by no means out of danger, for at one time, as he says in his short letter of October 24, the bullets poured in upon us like hailstones. Another brief extract from the same letter shows how little he regarded himself. The boats in which the wounded were removed had swamped. It seemed an impossibility to get the wounded off before the morning when the shelling was certain to begin. At Fair Oaks, he bore himself with distinguished intrepidity, attending to his surgical duties in the very midst of the conflict, while wounded and unwounded men, with whom he was connecting, were shot dead at his feet. During this time the rest of the brigade had become separated and were far to the right. I rode hither and thither all over the field, trying in vain to find the 15th. At last, I stumbled upon all that was left, about 175 men, went into battle with 503 men, and lost 321 killed and wounded, and 24 missing. Surgeon Haven's last hasty note, from Falmouth, opposite Fredericksburg, bears the date December 9. At the close of it, he thus refers to the preparatory orders for the disastrous Battle of the 13th, "We have this moment received to have tomorrow morning, right after breakfast, 3 days' rations issued to officers and men, and 60 rounds of ammunition to each man." This looks like moving, and it remains to be seen what will be done. A portion of the sad story can best be told in the words of his superior officer, Surgeon Sherman, after speaking of sacrifices to duty, and utter disregard of danger. He said, witnessing his self-exposure at the Battle of Antietam, "I had, as medical director of the 2nd Division, detailed your son, in a written order, in the event of a battle, to repair to the division hospital, and give his services there instead of in the field with his regiment. When I communicated this order to your son, he felt disappointed. He expressed a strong choice to go wherever his regiment went, and when the column to which 15th Massachusetts was attached was about to pass over the bridge in front of Fredericksburg, he was expostulated with, and reminded of the previous order, but he asked as a special favor to be allowed to go with his regiment, and said that as soon as the fight was done, he would return to the hospital and remain there. Only a short time after, while marching through the streets of the city by the side of his regiment, toward the position assigned it in that day's battle, he was struck in the leg by a casual shell from the enemy's batteries. Taken back to the hospital, it was for a time hoped that an amputation might save his life, but he never rallied from the shock. And so, cheerful in his agony, upheld by the consciousness of duty performed in that shattered building, even then rent by an occasional shell, adding more confusion and horror to the scene surrounded by the dying and the dead, amid the moans of those assuage whose early pangs he had ventured and suffered all, the patriot passed away, and his gentle spirit, answering to the roll call of the mighty cannonade, took its place in the great army which that night encamped in the heavenly fields. His name is included on the Worcester, Massachusetts, Civil War Monument. Credit to C. E. Davis, Jr., author of The History of the 13th Massachusetts Volunteers. John Theodore Hurd was born in Boston, on May 28, 1836, the son of John Trull Hurd and Elmira Patterson, both of Boston. He died at his summer residence in Magnolia, Massachusetts, on September 2, 1906. He was educated in the Boston Latin School and at the Harvard Medical School, graduating in 1859. His great-grandfather, Nathaniel Hurd, was one of the Minutemen who marched from Ipswich to Lexington when the call to arms was sounded on April 19, 1775. He then entered the Massachusetts General Hospital as an intern and completed his service in the hospital in that capacity. Subsequently, he studied abroad in Dublin and Paris. While he was abroad, in Moscow, pursuing his medical studies, the news of the firing on Fort Sumter reached him and he decided once to return home and offer his services to his country. The news of the firing on Fort Sumter reached him at Seville, at sunset. He and his brother took the early morning train for home by way of Paris, arriving at the Gare de Lyons with only half a franc in their pockets. They could not stop anywhere to draw on their letter of credit. The next morning, after a call on his bankers, they hurried to the Cunard office and bought the 2 remaining state rooms on the America. Upon arrival, in Boston, on July 16, 1861, he joined the 13th Regiment, Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry, at Fort Independence, as an assistant surgeon. Dr. Hurd was a man of refinement and culture. Though modest and unassuming to a very unusual degree, he projected his dignity, his sweetness of temper, and simplicity of manner. On May 1, 1862, Dr. Hurd was appointed surgeon, to the 1st of the 2nd Division of the 1st Army Corps, which was at the time Durier's brigade of McDowell's corps. On October 28, 1862, he was appointed chief surgeon of the same division. 2 weeks later he was appointed medical director of the 1st Army Corps, under Major General John Reynolds. Serving on the 1st Army Corps staff, Dr. Hurd befriended Colonel Charles Wainwright, also buried at Mount Auburn Cemetery, Chief of 1st Corps Artillery. Dr. Hurd's family was of a high social standing, and his diary mentions that at one time in 1864, he attended the theater with President Lincoln. When the Federal Army arrived at Gettysburg, new field hospitals were established in what is today called Mount Joy Township near Gettysburg. The field hospitals, established in town on July 1, were overrun by Confederate forces. The plaque pictured commemorates what occurred at these hospitals. The plaque reads, Army of the Potomac. Medical Department, Field Hospitals, 1st Corps. The Division Field Hospitals of the 1st Corps were located on July 1 at the Lutheran Theological Seminary, the Pennsylvania College, the Courthouse, the Lutheran College Church, and other churches and in Gettysburg. When these fell into the hands of the Confederates, the chief medical officers remained with the wounded. On July 2, hospitals were established near the White Church on the Baltimore Pike. These hospitals cared for 2,379 wounded. Medical Director First Surgeon J.T. Hurd, U.S. Volunteers 1st Division Surgeon. C.W. New, 7th. Indiana Infantry, 2nd Division. C.J. Nordquist, 83rd New York Infantry 3rd Division. Surgeon W.T. Humphrey, 109th Pennsylvania Infantry. Medical Officer in charge of the Corps Hospital Surgeon A.J. Ward, 2nd Wisconsin Infantry. At Gettysburg. The loss of the Corps today is put at 7,000, some 3,000 of them being in good health, prisoners, captured at the last charge, and picked up in the town. On July 1, 1863, all of the wounded, and nearly all the surgeons were prisoners in the town, including Hurd and Back. July 4, Saturday, as usual. We were up by daylight this morning, but it was not ushered in by a volley of cannon and musketry as it was yesterday. On the contrary, the pickets in the outskirts of the town soon reported that there was no enemy in their front. Very soon after, Hurd and Back were seen trudging up the hill, on foot, and joyfully went down to see the Union to meet them. They said that the rebels had withdrawn from the town during the night, their pickets just at daylight. The severely wounded of the first day and those of the enemy were left in the town, as also all the surgeons of the 1st and 11th Corps who were caught there upon our falling back. In addition to the Battle of Gettysburg he was at Cedar Mountain, the Second Battle of Bull Run, Chancellorsville, Rappahannock, Antietam, Atlanta Campaign, Columbia, Spring Hill, South Mountain, Franklin, and Nashville. Silas Atherton Holman was born on July 11, 1832, in Gardiner, Maine. He died December 24, 1894, from paralysis, at York Harbor, Maine. He attended Boston's Tremont Street Medical School and graduated in 1853. In 1850 he was awarded 2 degrees from Harvard College, M.D. and MMSS. At that time his residence was in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Military service. Partial credit: 7th Massachusetts Voluntary Infantry in the War of the Rebellion of the Southern States against Constitutional Authority 1860–1865. Nelson V. Hutchinson, author. 1890. These are Dr. Holman's service dates. Mustered in as a surgeon in the 7th Massachusetts Regiment Volunteer Infantry on June 15, 1861. He was promoted to lieutenant on September 2, 1863. He became a major on September 9, 1863. That promotion transferred him to the United States Volunteers. Promoted to brevet lieutenant colonel on October 19, 1864. Promoted to brevet full colonel on March 13, 1865. He retired on January 10, 1866. From Mr. Hutchinson's book. On August 5, 1862, the regiment made a reconnaissance to Turkey Island Bend. After marching all night, the general found himself lost. The regiment returned to the camp. On August 8 they made another reconnaissance to Hacksaw's Station and then Malvern Hill, near Richmond, Virginia. While on the move, Steward Gallagher was bitten by a copperhead snake. In a short time, he was swollen beyond recognition, but with the use of good old commissary whiskey combined with gunpowder, under the direction of Surgeon, Steward Gallagher's life was saved. Surgeon Holman was remembered by all of the regiment as a very faithful and competent nurse. Many of the brave boys' lives had been saved by his faithfulness rather than by the surgeon's. On the 16th they marched 25 miles and crossed the Chickahominy. When the regiment established a camp, Surgeon Holman and his assistant Zabdiel Boylston Adams had their tents erected, and, as the climatic change began to operate upon the boys, the castor oil began to run and some of it went down many of the poor soldiers' throats, and with paregoric a sulfuric ether, which quenched the ardor many of the hospital visitant as diffusive influences were felt in the soldiers' system. Typhoid fever became a prevalent form, which disease Major Monks and Michael Carey of the company died, as well as several others. Charles Edward Inches was born in East Boston on August 31, 1840. On January 12, 1911, he died at his home in Boston. His earliest school days were at Phillips Academy, in Andover, Massachusetts, to prepare for college, but he did not remain to complete his studies there. He finished his college preparation at the high school in Jamaica Plain. He then entered Harvard and graduated in the class of 1861. Next, he entered Harvard Medical School and received his medical degree in 1862. During his time at Harvard, on September 11, 1860, he enlisted in the Independent Corps of Cadets, at Fort Warren in Boston Harbor. It was a state militia that went back to 1741. On May 26, 1862, the cadets, including Dr. Inches, were mustered into U.S. federal service. He was mustered out on July 2, 1802. During that time, he spent 3 or 4 weeks at the Peninsula Campaign in southeast Virginia. When he returned to Boston, he interned at the Massachusetts General Hospital. He re-enlisted in the Army and was appointed Assistant Surgeon of the 37th Massachusetts Regiment 6th Army Corps. He mustered in on April 13, 1865, and out on June 19, 1865. Partial credit. Memorials of the Class of 1835, Harvard University. By Charles Horatio Gates, 1886. William Ingalls, the son of an eminent physician of Boston, was born in that city on January 12, 1813. He died at Boston's hospital on December 1, 1903. His preparatory studies were pursued at the Boston Latin School, and several others, until he finally went to the Academy of Israel E. Putnam, North Andover, Massachusetts, where he remained until 1830, when he entered Harvard. He voluntarily left Harvard at his freshman year for various causes, a step which he declared to be one of the greatest regrets of his life. However, he received his bachelor's degree from Harvard in 1878. He then studied medicine for 4 years under the direction of his father, along with Dr. Charles Harrison Stedman, who was a surgeon at the United States Marine Hospital at Chelsea. He graduated from Harvard Medical School in 1836. In 1838, he went to Louisiana, and after a year he returned to Boston, and was married at Roxbury. They returned to Louisiana where they stayed 8 years. In 1888, he was appointed surgeon of the United States Marine Hospital. He was reformed out by President Pierce. He settled in Winchester, Massachusetts. In 1862, he went to northern North Carolina as a surgeon with the 5th Regiment, Massachusetts Voluntary Infantry, for 9 months. In October 1863, he was appointed a surgeon in the 59th Regiment, Massachusetts Veteran Volunteers, and remained in Virginia until the war ended. Years later, he noted that since 1865, he'd been trying to cure everybody around Boston. He was also a surgeon at the hospital when it first opened. He noted that his most honorable and responsible position was being on the surgical staff at Boston City Hospital where he practiced for 14 years. Dr. George Howard Jones was born on July 20, 1843, in Cambridge, Massachusetts. He died September 10, 1910, in Harrison, Maine. He was a graduate of Harvard Medical in 1864. His father Dr. George S. Jones, was a prominent physician-surgeon. On July 28, 1864, he joined the 5th Regiment, Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry, as an assistant surgeon. The period of service was 100 days. That group trained and guarded Washington, D.C., and Baltimore. He mustered out on November 10, 1864. Dr. George H. Jones was a 33rd-degree Mason, a member of the Massachusetts Ancient and Honorable Artillery Company, and a member of the Elks. William Henry Lathrop was born on March 11, 1840, in Enfield, Massachusetts. He died at Lowell, Massachusetts December 25, 1917. He fitted for college at the Boston Public Latin School. In the winter of 1854 and 1865, he took a course in medicine at the University of Pennsylvania where he received an M.D. degree on March 11, 1865. He remained there for a year attending medical lectures in the winter of 1863–64, at the Jefferson Medical College. On August 10, 1843, he received an appointment as an medical cadet at the Satterley General Hospital in Philadelphia. From August 29, 1862, to June 18, 1863, he was a private in the 44th Regiment, Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry. On March 16, 1865, he was appointed as an assistant surgeon and ordered to the Army of the Potomac. On June 14, 1865, he was commissioned an assistant surgeon to the 55th Regiment, Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry, and joined the regiment at Orangeburg, South Carolina. He was at Barnwell, South Carolina and was later stationed on a vessel near Hilton Head Island as the quarantiner for that harbor. He left the Army on November 1, 1866. He worked at various hospitals throughout the country practicing medicine amongst the poor and insane. In 1875, he was appointed a resident position at the State Almshouse in Tewksbury, Massachusetts. In 1803, he began to practice medicine in Lowell, Massachusetts and lived in the same house for 30 years. Upon his death, on December 29, 1917, the Boston Transcript stated, "Many will miss this kindly cheerful greeting, as they go to their morning work, for it was among workers who lived and worked, and they whose lives he best and truly honored." He was a skillful physician, a wise counselor, and a true friend. So simple in his life that he made no visible impression on the public life of the city where he lived. His best memorial is in the lives he healed and comforted, and in many a quiet home today he was beloved and mourned. David Francis Lincoln was born in Boston on January 4, 1841. He died in Boston on October 17, 1916, from hardening of the arteries. He studied at the Dwight Grammar School and in 1852 entered the Boston Public Latin School. He entered Harvard Medical School in September 1861 and received the degrees of A.M. and M.D. in 1864. On June 11, 1862, he sailed, as a nurse, from Boston, as a member of the Sanitary Commission, on the Commission's vessel, the Daniel Webster, to White House Landing. That vessel made 2 trips from the peninsula to New York. On the second trip, he attended to the wounded. The U.S. Sanitary Commission volunteers advised on the physical and mental health of the military, assisted in the organization of military hospitals and camps, and aided in the transportation of the wounded. They distributed medical supplies, food, and clothing where needed. After examination by Fleet Surgeon Rustenberger, on September 5, 1862, he received an appointment as acting assistant surgeon in the United States Navy. He served until February 5, 1864. He was attached to a motor propeller ship, the Montgomery. It carried 6 guns and cruised off Mobile, Alabama, in the autumn of 1862. In January 1863, the ship was ordered home for a court-martial upon Commander Hunter. The ship underwent repairs until June 17. Next, it was ordered to off Georgia's Banks and Grand Manan. During that time the vessel took 3 prizes worth $180,000. He mustered out of the Navy on February 25, 1864. Beginning on April 1, 1864, he was a resident surgeon at the Boston City Hospital. June 3, 1865, he sailed to Bremen to study medicine at Vienna where he stayed 4 months. Returning to Boston, in 1866, he opened an office and began practicing medicine. In March 1872, he established an office at 8 Beacon Street treating diseases of the nervous system, was his specialty. At the same time, he established a dispensary at 241 Harrison Avenue. In 1880, he began traveling to give lectures and taking teachers' assignments until 1887. Francis Minor Lincoln was born in Boston on January 29, 1830. He died in Wareham, Massachusetts, May 3, 1868. He was the son of Minor S. Lincoln, a well-known merchant. After graduating from the Norwich Military Academy in 1850 and then Trinity College in 1852, he immediately began the study of medicine at Tremont Street Medical School in Boston. At the same time, he was receiving private instruction from Professor Henry J. Bigelow. He received the degree of Doctor of Medicine from Harvard University in 1854 and immediately went to Paris where he remained until spring of 1855. He returned via New Orleans as a surgeon on a packet ship with immigrants. Up until 1861, he made many such voyages. On September 12, 1861, he was commissioned an assistant surgeon of the 9th Regiment, Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry. On June 28, 1862, he was commissioned a surgeon in the 35th Regiment, Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry until his discharge for a disability on March 10, 1863. After regaining his health, he again entered the service as an acting assistant surgeon. He continued to discharge those duties for over 2 years. When he returned home his health was very much impaired, having contracted pulmonary consumption. The final 2 years of his life were passed at his father's residence in Wareham, Massachusetts, patiently awaiting the result of the disease. Henry Orlando Marcy was born on June 23, 1837 in Otis, Massachusetts. He died January 1, 1924, at his home in Boston. He received his preliminary and classical education at Wilbraham Academy and Amherst College. He graduated from Harvard Medical School in 1863. In April of that same year, he was commissioned as an assistant surgeon for the 43rd Regiment, Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry. In the following November, he was commissioned as a surgeon of the 1st Regiment of Colored Troops, recruited in North Carolina. In 1864 he was appointed medical director of Florida and served on the staffs of Generals Van Wyck, Porter, and Hatch. He resigned his commission in June of 1865, his last service being the sanitary renovation of Charleston, South Carolina. At the end of the war, he returned to the practice of medicine. In 1869 he went to Europe for further medical studies at the University of Berlin, remaining there for 1 year. There he familiarized himself with hospital services in various European cities, including the summer in London and Edinburgh. He was the first American pupil of Professor Lister and was convinced of the correctness of the then new this great master. On his return to Boston, he immediately devoted himself to the introduction of antiseptic methods of wound treatment, created a laboratory, and obtained the services of competent assistants. He devoted 10 years to the continuous study of microorganisms found in wounds, their cultivation in various media, their reproduction in animals, etc. In 1870, he familiarized himself with the practice of Mr. Lister's ligation of arteries in continuity, by the use of buried catgut ligature. In the autumn of that year, he modified their use for the purpose of closing subcutaneously wounds made for the cure of hernia. In 1880 Dr. Marcy established a private hospital in Cambridge for the treatment of surgical diseases of women to demonstrate the value of modern surgical techniques. To sum up, Dr. Marcy is undoubtedly due credit for introducing to America the methods of antiseptic wound treatment. His studies greatly improved upon the same and contributed largely in placing them on their present scientific basis. During the rest of his life, he wrote many papers and contributed to various medical books and publications. Henry Orlando Marcy was born on June 23, 1837 in Otis, Massachusetts. He died January 1, 1924, at his home in Boston. He received his preliminary and classical education at Wilbraham Academy and Amherst College. He graduated from Harvard Med School in 1863. In April of that same year, he was commissioned as an assistant surgeon for the 43rd Regiment, Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry. In the following November, he was commissioned as a surgeon of the 1st Regiment of Colored Troops, recruited in North Carolina. In 1864 appointed medical director of Florida and served on the staffs of Generals Van Wyck, Porter, and Hatch. He resigned his commission in June of 1865, his last service being the sanitary renovation of Charleston, South Carolina. At the end of the war, he returned to the practice of medicine. In 1869 he went to Europe for further medical studies at the University of Berlin, remaining there for 1 year. There he familiarized himself with hospital services in various European cities, including the summer in London and Edinburgh. He was the first American pupil of Professor Lister and was convinced of the correctness of the then new this great master. On his return to Boston, he immediately devoted himself to the introduction of antiseptic methods of wound treatment, created a laboratory, and obtained the services of competent assistants. He devoted 10 years to the continuous study of microorganisms found in wounds, their cultivation in media, their reproduction in animals, etc. In 1870, he familiarized himself with the practice of Mr. Lister's ligation of arteries in continuity, by the use of buried catgut ligature. In the autumn of that year, he modified their use for the purpose of closing subcutaneously wounds made for the cure of hernia. In 1880 Dr. Marcy established a private hospital in Cambridge for the treatment of surgical diseases of women to demonstrate the value of modern surgical techniques. To sum up, Dr. Marcy is undoubtedly due credit for introducing to America the methods of antiseptic wound treatment. His studies greatly improved upon the same and contributed largely in placing them on their present scientific basis. During the rest of his life, he wrote many papers and contributed to various medical books and publications. Francis Miller McClellan was born on January 21, 1817, in Portland, Connecticut. He died on November 12, 1863, at Maspeth, Queens, County, New York. His wife was Mary Elizabeth Hull McClellan, the daughter of General William Hull of the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812. The general is buried in Newton, Massachusetts. The monument atop the McClellan tomb was dedicated by Dr. McClellan's wife to her father and her brother who was killed in the War of 1812, whose body was not returned. In 1839, he earned a Bachelor of Arts degree. Brown. He was in the class of Harvard in 1843 and earned an M.D. This is the only information that I could locate. Civil War service. He first enlisted, in the 1st Marine Artillery Company, on September 1, 1862 in New York, as a non-commissioned surgeon. It was a 3-year enlistment. He mustered out on March 31, 1863. He enlisted, in New York's 13th Artillery, for 3 years. On June 2, 1863, at Albany, New York, he mustered in as a non-commissioned surgeon. His service record him as missing on October 31, 1863. His body was identified on November 12, 1863. The record notes that he died from disease, at Maspeth, Long Island, New York. The Boston Post, Saturday, April 2, 1864, obituary notice. Dr. Marcus Aurelius Moore was born in Boston in November 1824. He died at Waltham, Massachusetts on March 30, 1864, aged 39 years. He died from severe and severe exposure, contracted while on duty at Hilton Head, South Carolina, that caused a diabetic disease, accompanied by a carbuncular inflammation. That resulted in a long period of suffering that caused his death. He was originally trained for the Army and maintained a high position in all his studies at Point. He contracted a severe illness while camping out in a very wet and inclement season, which rendered him unable to endure longer the severe discipline of that excellent institution. When his health was restored, he applied himself to the study of surgery and medicine, under the instruction of Boston's Dr. Winslow Lewis, who stated that Moore was the best anatomist and surgical operator of all his pupils. In 1847, after graduating Harvard College in Medicine and Surgery, with honors, he opened a practice in Boston where for more than 6 years, his gratuitous services to the sick poor elicited strong expressions of gratitude. On October 31, 1861, he mustered into the 1st Massachusetts Cavalry, as a captain. He mustered out on January 5, 1863. After a 3-month stay in the Reedville, Massachusetts camp, he accompanied his regiment to Hilton Head, South Carolina. He continued to discharge arduous duties there with unremitting promptitude and diligence until at last his health gave way before the evil influence of malaria. The bad water added to a more than ordinary amount of fatiguing duty. After being confined to the hospital for some weeks, he was ordered home on sick leave, as the last chance of saving his life, bearing with him the seeds of a malady from which he never recovered. Although at times there seemed to be grounds for hoping for a return to health, it proved to be only deceptive gleams of hope. Near his end, he gradually wasted away, until few indeed would have recognized in his pale face and emaciated form, as the once erect and fine-looking cavalry officer of 1861. Credit to the Cambridge Historical Society, Volume 7, 1913. John Taylor Gilman Nichols was born in Portland, Maine, on August 11, 1837. He died in Little Boar's Head, New Hampshire on August 25, 1911. Having decided upon his profession, Dr. Nichols entered the Harvard Medical School in 1859. After medical school, he had a short term at Rainsford Island Hospital, in Boston Harbor, where he had a most unusual and interesting experience with smallpox. In the summer of 1859, he opened his first office in Cambridge. Soon after he established himself, the Civil War broke out. He, and other Cambridge physicians, offered their services on June 1, 1862. On May 16, 1864, he was appointed as an acting assistant surgeon, at the 12th Unattached Regiment, Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry stationed at Provincetown, Massachusetts. He was discharged from there on November 1, 1862. He mustered it out of that company on August 15, 1864. In the spring of 1867, Civil War nurse, Emily Parsons, secured a suitable place for the Cambridge Hospital. Her efforts met with Dr. Nicholas's most hearty assistance, and during the First War, he and Dr. Charles Vaughan, also noted in this project, visited the hospital daily, in alternate months. Dr. Nichols was a faithful visiting physician at the Cambridge Hospital until 1903, when having reached the age limit he resigned. John Pond Ordway was born in Salem, Massachusetts, on April 1, 1824. He died in Boston, on April 27, 1880. In the mid-1840s, he and his father, Aaron, opened a music store in Boston. Dr. Ordway was also a music publisher and actor. Around 1845, he organized Ordway's Aeolians, God of Winds, a blackface minstrel troupe that performed at Ordway Hall in Boston and also nationally to promote Ordway's publishing business. James Lord Pierpoint's first major composition, The Returned Californian, in 1852, was written expressly for Ordway and his troupe of players. Several 19th-century songs were written for the Aeolians and dedicated to Ordway, including James Lord Pierpoint's Jingle Bells. During the Civil War, Pierpont fought for the Confederacy. Dr. Ordway graduated from Harvard College in 1850 and Harvard Medical in 1861. He claimed that he was one of the first surgeons to volunteer at the beginning of the Civil War. The records of the Massachusetts soldiers, sailors, and Marines in the Civil War notes his service with the 1st Battery, Light Artillery, Massachusetts Volunteer Militia. After the declaration of war, that battery was federalized, on May 18, 1861, and after the required period of obligation was completed, Dr. Ordway mustered on May 18, 1861. That is also noted in Francis H. Brown's 1886 book. Harvard University. The War of 1861 to 1865, a record of services rendered in the Army and Navy of the United States, lists Dr. Ordway's service, from January 1, 1861, to August 7, 1861. Dr. Ordway's death notice, May 20, 1880, in the East Boston Advocate, and several other newspapers noted. Ordway was the first surgeon to go to the front and subsequently, at the close of the Battle of Gettysburg, he was one of 10 surgeons sent to minister to the wounded. Note that the Battle of Gettysburg was in July 1863, long after his term of enlistment had expired. That obituary also notes that Ordway served from 1859 to 1873, on the Boston School Board, and one term as a member of the Massachusetts House of Representatives. Other than Ordway's newspaper obituaries, I was unable to verify his Gettysburg claim. Partial credit, The Annals of the Harvard Medical, Class of 1852. Calvin Gates Page was born on July 3, 1829, in Boston. He died in Boston, on May 29, 1869. He graduated from the Mayhew School in 1842, and then the Boston English High School, in 1845. He decided to further his studies and went to the Boston Latin School, graduating in 1848. He then entered Harvard College. His father died in 1850. He took a short leave but was able to graduate with his class, 1852. He then entered the Harvard Medical School and graduated in 1855. His thesis was on Asiatic cholera. He married in June 1855. From March 1853 to 1858, he was a visiting physician at the Boston Dispensary until 1860. He began working at the Home for Aged and Indigent Colored Females, and secretary of the Suffolk District Medical Society. In August 1861, he was on duty at Fort Independence in Boston Harbor, as acting assistant surgeon, accompanying the 11th Regiment of the United States Infantry to Maryland. He was in charge of the Judiciary Square Hospital in Washington from April to August 1862. He served, as a surgeon, in the 39th Regiment, Massachusetts Voluntary Infantry from August 22, 1862, to September 1863. Once discharged for disability, he returned to his post, remaining until February 1865. In 1866, he was one of the Harvard examining committees on rhetoric and grammar. In 1867, he was a delegate to the National Unitarian Conference in New York. He was instrumental in establishing a military drill at the Boston Latin School. In April 1869, he and his family were in the process of moving from the intersection of Marlborough Street to the new house at Berkeley and Clarendon Streets. It was a one-block move. The family canary got loose and was chased by the family. They both were under a sofa. In the process of lifting the sofa, Dr. Page ruptured his gallbladder. He died 3 days later from peritonitis. His gallbladder had been a health issue that began in the Civil War. Dr. Henry Augustus Richardson was born in Boston on November 25, 1836. He died July 1, 1863, at Cambridge, Massachusetts. His early education was in the Cambridge schools. He took preparatory studies at Exeter Academy in New Hampshire and entered the freshman class of Harvard College in June 1854. He graduated in 1858. During his senior year, he was a frequent attendee at the lectures of the Harvard Medical School. In October 1858 he became a student at the United States Marine Hospital in Chelsea under the charge of Charles A. Davis and remained there for 3 years. In July 1861 he received a degree of M.D. from the Harvard Medical School. In August 1861, he passed the examination of the Naval Board and was commissioned, acting assistant surgeon. He soon joined the North Atlantic Aiding Squadron on the United States steamer the Cambridge. He became the first volunteer in his position from New England. The vessel was the first merchant steamer that left for the Charleston Navy Yard to be refitted as a gunboat. As a consequence of exposure to wet and cold during the winter season and the restraint from habitual exercise, Dr. Richardson's health failed. That caused bitter disappointment in his aspirations and induced the development of a disease that had proved fatal to his mother and elder brother. When the Cambridge put into Baltimore for repairs, he visited home for a brief furlough. His decline was painfully apparent. His figure had become thin, gaunt, and bent. His system was shaken by a racking cough. Physician friends thought that he should resign his commission and seek to restore his health. But he steadfastly refused, saying that while the war lasted, he should remain in the service of his country. His rapid decline continued as the summer advanced and he calmly and firmly awaited the final catastrophe. One of his final acts was to obtain the photographs of his college class. Their silent company cheered the lonely hours as he recalled memories of a brighter and happier past. He passed the last day of his life in a hopeful discussion of the military movement 3 days after culminated in the victory of Gettysburg. In the evening, he retired into a deep sleep and slumbered soundly all night. When he awoke in the morning, he was weary and turned to slumber again and never more awoke. Partial credit to the obituary records of graduates of Yale University, 1890 to 1900. Richard Henry Salter was born in Mansfield, Connecticut, on August 4, 1808. He died July 20, 1893, at the West End of Boston, following his right femur crossing his room. He prepared for college at Willington, Connecticut, and Andover Academy in Massachusetts. Owing to a peculiar shyness and disposition, he gave up the idea of a college course. He covered the ground of collegiate studies by himself and with tutors. 1826. He began the study of medicine with Dr. Samuel B. Woodward, of Wethersfield, Connecticut, whose family he resided with for most of the time until 1832. Later he was the doctor's assistant. His medical degree was earned at Yale University. He first settled in Norwich, Connecticut, but removed in the fall of 1835, to Boston's West End. During the Civil War, he was a surgeon in the 1st Regiment Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry, from May 1861 to February 1863, until ill health compelled him to resign in February 1863, a year before the end of his enlistment. During his service, he would have seen action at the battles of Bull Run, Blackburn Ford, Budd's Ferry, Yorktown, Williamsburg, where they had heavy casualties, Fair Oaks, the 7-day battles at Glendale, Malvern Hill, Bristol Station, Manassas, with heavy casualties, and the 2nd of Fredericksburg. Had he not been discharged for disability, he would have participated in the Battle of Gettysburg in July 1863. A good account for a child with a peculiar shyness and disposition. Dr. Henry Martin Saville was born in Quincy, Massachusetts, on July 29, 1833. He died on January 11, 1881, at his New York summer home. He studied at Phillips Exeter Academy, from 1853 to 1854. He graduated from college, class of 1856. He continued his studies at the Pennsylvania Medical College, from 1856 to 1858. He then practiced medicine in Quincy until the beginning of the war and 1861. On April 16, 1861, he mustered into the regiment, Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry, as a surgeon. His regiment's obligation was 90 days. At first, the regiment went to Fort Monroe, Virginia. He was at the Battle of Big Bethel, on the Virginia Peninsula, on June 10, 1861. He mustered out on July 22, 1861. After his discharge, he examined recruits from Norfolk County, Massachusetts, until the end of the war. He returned to his successful practice at Quincy. His health failed and he had to relinquish one of the largest family medical practices in the city. Thomas DeLapp Smith was born in Machias, Maine on May 5, 1837. On March 20, 1912, he died at the Massachusetts General Hospital. He received his early education in his hometown. At the outbreak of the Civil War, on May 29, 1861, he entered the Army as a private in Company A, of 1st Rhode Island Volunteers. He was taken prisoner at the First Battle of Bull Run and was exchanged, after 6 months of imprisonment. He then served in the 2nd, Massachusetts Cavalry from January 8, 1863, to May 4, 1864. Later he was appointed as a hospital steward at the U.S. Army Hammond Hospital at Point Lookout, Maryland, where he served for the rest of the war. After the war, he completed his professional studies which he had begun at Harvard Medical School in March 1862. In 1867, after taking additional courses at Harvard and Bowdoin, he was awarded his M.D. degree. He then opened his practice. 3 years, in East Hampton, Massachusetts, then Gloversville, New York 1870 to 1877, and then, Broadalbin, New York, from 1877 to 1894, finally, in Town, New York from 1895 to 1905. The remainder of his life was spent in Roxbury, Massachusetts. Credit: The History of the 3rd Massachusetts, Assistant Surgeon, Woodbridge R. Howe. Alfred Augustus Stocker was born July 19, 1819, in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. He died on March 15, 1910, in Cambridge, Massachusetts. He practiced in Cambridge until his retirement. He received his M.D. degree from Harvard Medical School in 1853. A Cambridge resident, he was 43 years old when commissioned into the Army. In 1861, he assisted in raising the 12th Regiment, Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry. He was nominated by Colonel Webster to be a major surgeon, but unavoidable circumstances compelled him to decline. In May 1862, by request of Massachusetts Governor Andrew, he went to the front in Virginia and joined the Army of the Potomac. Arriving at the White House on the Pamunkey River, he was placed in charge of a division. He established the Great Field Hospital. Upon the breaking up of the hospital, he was assigned to the 31st Pennsylvania, as an acting surgeon. From July 20 to October 1, he participated in the whole Peninsula Campaign. He was at the battles of South Mount and Antietam. He was commissioned as a surgeon of the 3rd Regiment, Massachusetts Volunteer Militia, on October 16, 1862, serving in North Carolina until being mustered out of the regiment. October 1863, he was commissioned Major Surgeon of the 58th Regiment, Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry, 9th Army Corps, with General Burnside. During the winter of 1863–64, he was at Reedville, Massachusetts, on the staff of General Pierre, serving as Special Inspector of Recruits. He was with General Grant from the Wilderness to Petersburg, Virginia. On account of physical disability contracted in the service, he resigned on August 1, 1864, and was honorably discharged. John Winthrop Taylor was born in New York City on August 19, 1817. He died in Boston on January 19, 1880, from heart disease, 3 weeks after his wife's death. John Winthrop Taylor was appointed as a naval assistant surgeon in 1838. During his naval career, he served at sea and was promoted to surgeon in 1852. From April 30 to May 1, 1857, Dr. Taylor was a surgeon on the USS St. Mary's. He accompanied Captain Charles Henry Davis to arrange the surrender terms of the rogue American mercenary General William at Rivas, Nicaragua. During the Civil War, he participated in Farragut's capture of New Orleans and was involved in the Mississippi River Campaign. He became Surgeon General in 1878, a post he held for 10 months. During his administration, Dr. Taylor succeeded in getting through Congress appointing apothecaries as warrant officers in the Navy. He also sponsored a study of the Navy rations and developed a revised book of instructions for medical officers, the forerunner of the Manual of the Medical Department. He served as Chief of the Bureau of Medicine and Surgery. Dates of rank: Assistant Surgeon, March 7, 1838. Surgeon, May 1, 1852. Medical Director, March 3, 1871. Chief of Bureau of Medicine and Surgery, October 21, 1878, retired list. Upon his death, Benjamin Rush Tinslar was born September 11, 1800, in Pittstown, New York. He died November 23, 1864, in Charlestown, Massachusetts. He entered the Navy in 1823 and only his death ended his duty. His record of death, published on November 3, 1864, New York Tribune, honors his life. Dr. Benjamin R. Tinslar has been suddenly called from a long and useful career in his country's service to that better land. With a wicked cease from troubling and the weary rest. For more than 40 years Dr. Tinslar was a full surgeon on duty, most of the time at sea. His great experience in his profession, his close attention to his patients, his kind-heartedness, good humor, and gentility of disposition made him a universal favorite, with officers and men, both at sea and on the shore. His success, both as a surgeon and a practitioner of medicine, remarkable. In Navy yards, where he was stationed, his services were sought by rich and poor not specially entitled to call upon him, and none were ever refused. He was preeminently a model domestic man, and his death leaves a vacancy in the family circle that no comforter but God can fill. He was of sound views with regard to religion, a communicant of the Church, and endeavored to serve his Master in heaven, as well as his fellow creatures on earth. Light lie the earth upon you, dear, good and genial old doctor, until the morn of the resurrection of the just. Jabez Baxter Upham was born May 13, 1820, in Claremont, New Hampshire. He died March 17, 1892, in Manhattan, New York. He was educated at Union Academy in Meridian, New Hampshire. He commenced the study of medicine at Hanover, New Hampshire, under instruction of Doctors Peasley, Crosby, and Hubbard, members of Dartmouth College, and continued the study, subsequently, for 4.5 years, in the public medical schools of Boston and Philadelphia, medical departments of Dartmouth and Bowdoin, Harvard, and the University of Pennsylvania, and South Boston and Deer Island Hospital. He graduated from Dartmouth in 1842, and the Harvard Medical School in 1847. He practiced medicine in Boston until the outbreak of the Civil War. He enlisted and served from March 1862 to April 1863, as a surgeon major under General Burnside. After the war, he resumed his practice in Boston. In 1880, he went to New York City and formed the copartnership with Austin Colburn. His firm Colburn Banking Company was founded in 1849. At one time Dr. Upham was president of the Handel and Haydn Society and was instrumental in securing the Greek organ for the music hall. Charles Everett Vaughan was born on August 24, 1835, in Hollowell, Maine. He died on June 24, 1904, in Santa Barbara, California. He lived in Cambridge for most of his life and kept a practice at 8 Garden Street. He graduated from Harvard Medical School in 1863. On April 15, 1863, Dr. Vaughan joined the United States Navy as an acting assistant surgeon. He was assigned to the United States ironclad Eastport, as part of the Mississippi River Squadron. In the fall of 1863, he was ordered to report on board the receiving ship Clara Dobson at Cairo, Illinois. That receiving ship served as harbor defense and for training purposes. In July 1864, he transferred to the USS Vindicator. He was honorably discharged on October 21, 1865. After the war, Vaughan practiced his profession, in Cambridge, for 30 years. Those years were marked with attainment and distinction. He was an officer of the Cambridge Dispensary for Old Cambridge. In 1881, he started the organization, the Associated Charities of Cambridge. In 1895, Dr. Vaughan retired to Santa Barbara, California, and the following year he sold his property on Garden Street, Cambridge, to Radcliffe College. Robert Ware was born on April 2, 1833, in Boston. On April 10, 1863, at noon, outside Washington, North Carolina, he died from pneumonia. His death was partly owing to overwork, taking care of many poor sick former slaves, in addition to his necessary daily work. He was prepared for college at the Boston Latin School and entered the freshman class at Harvard College, in 1848, he being its youngest member. He graduated with honors in 1852. He began the study of medicine in Boston and spent the year 1855, enjoying the advantages of the hospitals of Paris. In 1856, he obtained his medical degree from Harvard Medical. His first patients were the poor. No thought of ease of pleasure could cause him to leave the bedside of his most wretched patient. At the beginning of the Civil War, he was a member of the Sanitary Commission, from 1861 to 1862. That commission was a civilian organization authorized by the United States government to provide medical and sanitary assistance to the Union volunteer forces during the United States Civil War, 1861 to 1865. He then the 45th Regiment, Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry, from 1862 to 1863. He was at the Battle of Culpeper, Virginia in 1862. Dr. Alonzo Carter Weber was born on February 27, 1827, in Boston. He died on August 5, 1904 at Manchester by the Sea, in Massachusetts. He was a graduate of Harvard College. In 1849, he received his M.D. from the Harvard Medical School. He practiced in Cambridge for 50 years. During the Civil War, he served as a surgeon in the 43rd Regiment, Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry from October 20, 1862, to August 20, 1863. In November, the regiment was engaged in the Goldsboro, North Carolina expedition and the battle at Kingston, at Whitehall. They remained in that area until June 24 when they relocated to Baltimore, where they were detached from the Army of the Republic until July 18, 1863, when General Lee retreated to Virginia. That day the regiment left for home in Boston. Ware practiced medicine in Cambridge for over 50 years and served in the Massachusetts State Legislature circa 1880. Credit located on Dr. Wheelwright's findagrave.com memorial. I am searching for the book, Correspondence of Dr. Charles H. Wheelwright, Surgeon of the United States Navy, by Charles Henry Wheelwright, edited by Hildegard B. Forbes, Thomas Todd Company. I believe that is the source of much of this narrative. Charles Henry Wheelwright was born May 29, 1813, in Boston. He died on the United States ship San Jacinto on July 30, 1862, in Pilottown, Louisiana. He was the son of Lot Wheelwright, a shipbuilder, ship-owner, merchant in Boston, and Susanna Wilson of West Cambridge. Charles was the youngest of 6 children born to this union. Charles suffered from delicate health for most of his life. He did travel to England, Wales, Scotland, and Ireland as a youth, as he had a restlessness that could not be by simply staying at home with his loved ones. In 1831, he entered Harvard. He suffered another health issue with his lungs and took off from school for a while and lived in New Orleans, Louisiana, but returned to school after the winter season. He graduated with a Bachelor of Arts from Harvard in 1834. After school he decided on a course of medicine and entered the office of Dr. George C. Shattuck, becoming a member of his household and apprenticing himself to the doctor. In 1837, he received a degree in medicine from Harvard and became an M.D. On October 17, 1839, he joined the U.S. Navy as an assistant surgeon. He was soon after given orders for service of the sloop of war, Marion, and remained with her for 3 years, mainly in the waters around Brazil. He returned in 1843, spending time on the ships Ohio and Independence. In 1845, he returned to the Navy Hospital at Pensacola, Florida. While there, an outbreak of yellow fever occurred with Charles taking charge of most of the doctor and nursing duties, as the surgeon assigned was also sick. After much time was expended caring for the ill, dying, and dead, Charles too came down with the disease. After his recovery, he was given a leave of absence and once again traveled to Europe, visiting hospitals in Paris and other cities. He rejoined active naval service with the Mediterranean Squadron in 1848. In 1850, he was sent to California as the gold rush had had adverse effects on the station there in that men were deserting and officers resigned to follow the gold fever. He was transferred to another ship and saw Oregon and Vancouver Island before returning to the east coast of America. In 1859, he was assigned to the Powhatan as part of Commodore Perry's expedition to Japan. Charles was not present at the signing of the peace treaty between the two countries as he had been transferred to another ship for service in China before the signing. In 1859, after having been home for a while, he was assigned to a cruise in the Gulf of Mexico. The climate during that voyage once again affected his respiratory condition. In 1860, he was assigned to the Philadelphia Navy Yard and in 1861, to the Brooklyn Navy Yard, both times sitting on the board to exam surgeons for admittance into the Navy. With the beginning of the Civil War, this task was quite hard on Charles as he was near exhaustion due to the demands being placed on him while serving on the board. He returned to duty in Boston where he was stationed and soon applied for active sea service, probably not being aware of how serious his health had become. On March 5, 1862, he sailed on the San Jacinto to search for the ship Vermont which reportedly had lost its mast and was stranded at sea. They did not hit the ship and would later learn the report had been incorrect. They were immediately given orders to depart for Hampton Roads, Virginia to assist in the expected sea battle with the Confederate ship Merrimac. He stayed in the area, even going ashore at Hampton Roads, for a while, until Norfolk, Virginia had been taken. In May, the Jacinto was assigned to the Gulf Fleet, consisting of 23 vessels, and Charles was assigned as the fleet surgeon. Charles was quite dismayed at his being assigned to the Gulf of Mexico again as he knew it did not bode well for his health. He suffered a severe bout of dengue, or breakbone, fever on his trip from North to Key West. He acquired this disease from a mosquito bite. Though weakened and fearful for his life, he did not ask to be relieved of duty. New orders came for him to go to Pilot's Town, a small town on the Mississippi River where a Union hospital had been hastily erected to treat the men stationed in the river squadron. The hospital was poorly provided and the care of the patients fell directly on the shoulders of the surgeon. Charles wrote home of the poor conditions, conflicting orders from the ship's captain, no furniture except what had been confiscated from the few homes in the area, and the tremendous strain he was under. He compared this to his in Florida during the yellow fever outbreak and stated that while the workload was heavy there, he was younger and stronger then. His present assignment was harder than Pensacola, as he was older and in poorer health. He had only one assistant and was soon weak from exhaustion and diarrhea. His letter stated, "There is need to get relief from this situation. I shall do my duty to the last." Charles became depressed as he could not save the lives of many of his patients due to the conditions he was working under and his declining health. In the last 24 hours before his death, he continued to work to try and save his patients. Dr. Wheelwright of disease in Pilot's Town, Mississippi while on active service. A plaque honoring him and his death is near the entrance to the Memorial Hall in Lowell Hall Complex at Harvard University. Edward Wigglesworth was born on December 30, 1840, in Boston. He died on January 23, 1896, in Boston. He first went to Miss Whitney's School, then Chauncey Hall School, and finally Boston Latin School. He graduated from Harvard a class of 1861, the sixth-generation graduate in his family. He graduated from Harvard Medical School in 1865. While at school, in 1862, he entered the Army enlisting in the 45th Regiment, Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry, as a private. It was a 9-month enlistment. Subsequently, on account of his having studied at the medical school for a year, he was made a hospital steward and later during the war, he became a surgeon. After completing his regular college course at Harvard, Dr. Wigglesworth entered the medical school from which he graduated in 1865. In June 1862, he became a medical assistant in the employ of the United States Sanitary Commission, at Richmond. On September 26 of the same year, he enlisted as a private in the 45th Regiment, Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry. A month later, when the Army became aware of his medical experience, he was made a hospital steward. He was at the battles of Kingston, Whitehall, Goldsboro, and Cove Creek, North Carolina. He mustered out on July 7, 1863. In June 1864, he re-entered the Army of the Potomac as a volunteer surgeon. He was stationed 9th Artillery Corps Hospital at White House, Virginia. After the war, he spent 5 years traveling Europe, including Paris, Geneva, and London, studying his chosen specialty, dermatology. He wrote many scholarly books, papers and articles on diseases of the skin. Having ample and being able to lead a life of leisure had he wished it, Dr. Wigglesworth chose a career working for the good of others. Partial credit. Appleton's Encyclopedia, and Richard M. Reed, November 8, 2018. Bert Green Wilder, a naturalist, was born in Boston, Massachusetts, on August 11, 1841. He died at his home in Chestnut Hill, Massachusetts on January 21, 1825. In 1885, he was president of the American Neurological Association and in 1898 of the Association of American Anatomists. While at Cornell, Wilder began what would become the Wilder Brain Collection. His brain was removed from his corpse and added to the collection. He graduated from the Lawrence Scientific School in 1862, and from the medical department of Harvard in 1866. From 1862 to 1863, he served in the United States Army as a medical cadet, and then an assistant surgeon. By May 1863, he had accepted a commission as an assistant surgeon in the newly formed Black 55th Regiment, Massachusetts Volunteers. During the 28 months that he served in the regiment, he developed a profound respect for the courage and commitment of the black soldiers. In what little time he had, when he was not attending to the sick and wounded or medical books, he collected species for his natural history collection, including a large silk spinning spider he discovered on Folly Island in 1863, that was later given his name, Nephila Wilder. In 1867, he was elected professor of physiology, comparative anatomy, and zoology at Cornell University, where a chair was established in his name. He was also a professor of physiology at the Medical School of Maine, Bowdoin College, from 1874 to 1884. His discovery, in 1862, that silk might be drawn from a living spider to the extent of 150 yards at a time, led to his further research on the habits of the spider and the qualities and usefulness of the silk. Beginning in 1880, he devoted his attention mostly to studies on the vertebrate brain. He also strived earnestly for the adoption of a uniform anatomical nomenclature, claiming that names should be as possible mononyms and that in each language should use the appropriate paronym of the Latin name, rather than the Latin form. In 1887, he described the brain of Ceratodus and showed that among vertebrates the proper cerebral hemispheres, the special organs of the mind, occupy 5 different positions relative to the olfactory tract bulbs, which are the direct continuations of the general brain axis and were probably the primitive and at first most important parts of the prosencephalon. In brain publications, he insisted upon the morphological significance of the cavities, and the need for greater care and improved methods in dissection and preparation. Sir Wilder lectured at Harvard in 1868. University of Michigan from 1876 to 1877. Lowell Institute, Boston, in 1866, the American Institute, New York, 1870 to 1873. The Cartwright Foundation, before the Alumni Association of the College of Physicians and Surgeons in 1884. He was a member of scientific societies, presiding over the section on biology of the American Association for the Advancement of Science in 1885. He was the president of the American Neurological Association in 1885. His bibliography includes nearly 100 technical papers in scientific and medical journals and the publications of learned societies, as well as about 80 reviews and articles in magazines. He also published in book form. Robert Willard was born on December 8, 1838 in Boston. He died on February 6, 1892, in Boston. He entered the Harvard Medical School in September 1860 and remained there until April 1862. He was appointed house physician in the Massachusetts Hospital and remained there for 1 year. In May 1863, he was appointed acting assistant surgeon in the United States Navy and ordered to the Charlestown Navy Yard, in Massachusetts. On June 1, 1863, he was commissioned as an assistant surgeon. On June 25, 1863, he was detached from the Navy Yard and ordered to the United States steamer John Adams at Newport, Rhode Island. He returned to Boston and had a private examination for his degree of medical doctor after the 1863 commencement. He returned to the John Adams and in August 1863, sailed for Port Royal, South Carolina. During August, September and October, the vessel was on duty off of Charleston, Port Royal, and Beaufort, South Carolina. In November he was ordered to the United States ironclad Catskill off of Charleston, South Carolina, for blockade duty, until his resignation on June 13, 1865, the Civil War having ended, he performed his duty on various ships and naval hospitals. In 1865, he settled into practice as a physician in Boston. He became a member of the Boston Society of Medical Observation. He was an assistant physician home for aged and indigent females, and the Eye and Ear Infirmary. In 1882, he gave up general practice and became one of the early specialists in ophthalmology. He was best known and remembered as an oculist. In his chosen specialty he was very successful and retained to the end of his life his connection to the charitable Eye and Ear Infirmary. At the height of his attainment, he fell victim to the grippe, the effects from which he never recovered.